The ISGAP report, stripped of diplomatic hedging, posits a single, stark proposition. The United States and the West is the target of a sophisticated, generations-long ideological colonization project authorized by the Muslim Brotherhood's doctrine of civilization jihad and executed not by invading armies but by a cadre of entryists who have successfully parasitized the nation's civic, religious, and governmental institutions. This is not a critique of terrorism, but of ideological subversion. The document's most provocative and deliberately unsettling claim is that America has been systematically naive, confusing the Brotherhood's strategic patience for moderation and mistaking its tactical use of democratic language for a genuine endorsement of liberal values. Deconstructing the Entryism model, a theory of metastasis. The report's framework is best understood as a theory of ideological metastasis. It maps the Brotherhood's U.S. presence not as a terrorist cell, but as a political-psychological operation with distinct phases. 1. The embryonic network, 1960s to 1980s. Establishment of beachhead organizations, MSA and ISNA, by foreign-born Brotherhood members, funded by Gulf Capital. Their purpose was not to assimilate, but to create a parallel social structure for Muslims in America, one that answers not to the U.S. Constitution first, but to a supremacist interpretation of Islamic governance, Hakimiyya. This provided the incubator. 2. The mimicry and legitimization phase, 1990s to 2000s. The network learns the vocabulary of its host. It spawns affiliates specializing in the language of victimhood, CAIR, civil rights, interfaith dialogue to co-opt religious legitimacy, and academic production, IIIT, to reshape intellectual discourse. The goal is mimesis, to appear as a domestic minority rights group while its core ideological drivers remain unchanged and unrenounced. This is where the report alleges strategic deception, taqiyya kitman, is operationalized not for personal safety but for political gain. 3. The integration and influence phase, 2000s to present. Having built a legitimate facade, individuals from the network enter the bloodstream of the state, as advisors to Homeland Security and the FBI, as chaplains in the military and prison system, as partners in countering violent extremism programs. The perverse irony the report screams is that the state now pays and empowers the very ideological matrix that spawns the radicalism it seeks to counter. This is Entryism perfected. The state is convinced to outsource its understanding of Islam to the Islamists. The uncomfortable questions the report forces into the open. The document's value, beyond its specific claims, lies in the deeply uncomfortable questions it forces a reader to confront, questions often stifled by charges of bigotry. On dual loyalty. Can an organization whose ultimate political allegiance is to a transnational caliphal project, as outlined in its founding documents, ever be a trustworthy partner for a sovereign nation-state? The report argues the U.S. has failed to even ask this question out of a misguided multiculturalism. On the nature of ideology. Is the Brotherhood's ideology a religion to be protected, or a totalizing political program masquerading as religion to claim immunity from criticism? The report insists on the latter, framing it as analogous to Leninist vanguardism, with its own doctrine, cell structure, and long march through institutions. On the corruption of dialogue. Has Western interfaith outreach been strategically manipulated? The report depicts scenes of Catholic bishops and Jewish rabbis standing alongside Brotherhood-linked figures, bestowing priceless mainstream legitimacy while being utterly outmatched in theological political sophistication. The dialogue becomes a one-way transmission belt for the entryists' respectability. On the failure of elites. The report is fundamentally an indictment of the American ruling class, bureaucratic, academic, and political. It portrays them as useful idiots, seduced by the language of inclusion and diversity, unable or unwilling to examine the foundational documents and long-term goals of the organizations they embrace. The soft weapon of civilization jihad, the report implies, was designed precisely to exploit this liberal weakness. The core provocation is seeing the system, not just the individuals. It argues that focusing on moderate personalities in CAIR or ISNA is like focusing on a friendly manager at a local franchise while ignoring the corporate charter. The system is the doctrine of the Brotherhood, which remains the unalterable bedrock. Individuals may act politely, but the institutional trajectory is fixed. This is why the report dismisses condemnations of terrorism from these groups as tactical, not philosophical. They condemn al-Qaeda's methods, which bring heat on the network, not its goals, the establishment of Sharia supremacy, which they share, but pursue through different, patient means. The ISGAP document is a Cold War-style manifesto for a new ideological conflict. It concludes that America is losing because it refuses to recognize the nature of the conflict. The enemy is not in caves, but in conference rooms at the Pentagon, on interfaith panels at the National Cathedral, and in university Middle Eastern studies departments. Its uncensored message is this: a civilization that cannot or will not defend its own epistemological and institutional boundaries from a deliberate, patient, and sophisticated entryist project is a civilization that has already begun to capitulate. Whether one accepts its specific mappings or not, the report forces a reckoning with the possibility that America's greatest vulnerabilities are not military but psychological and cultural. Its own openness and rule of law weaponized against it by an adversary that plays a longer, deeper game. The document asks, brutally, has America's creed of tolerance become a suicide pact?